A racist officer arrests a black pilot and confiscates his private plane, unaware that he is the owner of an aviation company. What started as a prejudiced records check turns into an unexpected revelation as the truth comes to light. Ethan Sanders gently pressed the accelerator, maneuvering his luxurious electric car into the private airport area. The wheels rolled smoothly on the polished tarmac, and the quiet hum of the engine blended with the fresh morning breeze. He appreciated the car's silence. It gave a sense of calm and refinement, much like the way he had navigated the challenges to achieve success, something few believed someone like him could attain. This private airport wasn't large, but it radiated an aura of exclusive luxury. It was reserved for successful business people and those of high social standing, and Ethan had worked tirelessly to stand alongside them. He had endured many sleepless nights and faced challenges and prejudices in the aviation industry, but it had all been worth it. Today was one of those days, a day when he would reach new heights, a day of opportunity to open doors that would expand his company on a global scale. His private plane, a gleaming gem, sat neatly on the runway, reflecting the early sunlight like a work of art. The plane's polished metal body exuded elegance yet strength, symbolizing the style Ethan had built for himself and his business. His company's logo, a modern emblem with sleek lines, stood out on the side of the plane, a testament to the journey Ethan had undertaken to build his private aviation empire. As Ethan stepped out of the car, he felt a surge of pride mixed with nervous anticipation. He took a deep breath, savoring the crisp, cool morning air, a reminder that everything he had achieved was the result of relentless persistence and effort. The navy blue suit fit him perfectly, hugging his tall frame, and the watch on his wrist, a meticulously crafted piece, understated yet refined, gently signaled his success. It was a reward he had given himself after closing his first deal for the company, and since then, it had become a symbol of his steady progress along the path he had chosen. As he approached the plane, Ethan noticed a group of technical staff nearby. They were chatting among themselves, but as they spotted him, the conversation abruptly stopped. Their gaze lingered on him, not in respect or admiration, but with a subtle suspicion, a doubt Ethan couldn't ignore. It was the kind of look he had encountered far too many times before. The look of those who didn't believe that someone like him could own a private plane, let alone run an aviation company. He was reminded of his early days when he first started the company, the times he was turned away without explanation, or questioned needlessly, all because of his appearance and background. Back then, he had only a small office and a modest team, but he was determined to overcome every obstacle. Now, even at the height of his career, he still had to confront this skeptical gaze, a sense of injustice he was used to but had never accepted. Ethan nodded briefly at the staff as he headed toward the plane, pulling his briefcase along. He noticed their eyes quickly shifted away, yet the heavy feeling didn't dissipate. The air grew tense, as though they were trying to find a way to check or verify something about him. He reminded himself not to dwell on it. His upcoming meeting was too important, and he couldn't afford to lose focus. Every step Ethan took on the runway was a testament to his success and determination. Despite all the difficulties and biases, he remained resolute, pressing forward. To him, flying was not merely a mode of travel, but a passion. It was the freedom he had found after years of relentless effort to reach the position he rightfully deserved. Before boarding the plane, he glanced back at the airport, a simple yet modern glass building, its gleaming surface reflecting the sunlight, exuding the elegance of a place frequented by only the most successful. But today, he sensed something different. A few airport staff members stood near the entrance, watching him with a look that was more than mere curiosity. It was a gaze laced with tension and unfamiliarity, a feeling he rarely encountered here. He sighed, trying to push the feeling aside. Ethan had grown accustomed to prejudice, but he had never allowed it to hold him back. As he climbed the plane's steps, he felt a cold air surrounding him. Those scrutinizing eyes, that vague suspicion, all were challenges he was all too familiar with. However, it didn't make them any easier to face. Ethan wanted not only to prove himself, but to shatter the limits others had imposed on him, simply because he didn't look like what they expected. With a sense of gravity and a burning determination, Ethan set down his briefcase, preparing for the flight and an important meeting, knowing that today would mark a turning point in his journey. As Ethan continued walking, a nearby technician, a stocky man with narrow eyes and a tense expression, stepped in front of him. The man looked him up and down, making no effort to hide his scrutiny, and after a moment of tense silence, he spoke. "Excuse me, sir," he said in a neutral tone, though his suspicion was unmistakable. "Are you the pilot of this plane?" A seemingly simple question, but loaded with a hint of disdain, caused Ethan to raise an eyebrow. He had prepared all necessary documents when scheduling the flight, and the inspection process was typically quick, especially at a small, high-end airport like this one. Ethan was even familiar with the airport staff here from previous flights. Questions like this weren't uncommon to him, yet each one still left him feeling offended. Ethan kept his tone calm and replied steadily, "Yes, I am the pilot of this flight," he emphasized, "and I am also the owner of this plane." The technician looked at him for a moment, clear disbelief flickering in his eyes before he quickly tried to mask it with a careless nod. "Understood," he said, his voice slightly faltering. "However, we need to double-check some information before you take off. It's just a standard procedure." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to contain his frustration. He knew this wasn't a standard procedure. He had flown at this airport many times and had never encountered such an excessive, unnecessary inspection. But arguing now would only escalate the situation, so he calmly opened his briefcase, pulling out all the required documents. His pilot's license, proof of ownership, and even technical specifications for the plane. The technician took the documents, flipping through each page with an air of indifference, as though not actually examining them but merely stalling. His gaze was filled with doubt, as if searching for some discrepancy to prove that Ethan was not the rightful owner of the plane. When the technician turned to walk toward the control tower to verify the information, Ethan stood there, feeling a rising tension and unease. Memories from the past came flooding back. Recalling the discrimination Ethan had previously faced, he remembered the early days of starting his company when he was just a young man with big dreams but lacking connections in the industry. Ethan had often worked twice as hard, proving his abilities multiple times more than others simply because he didn't fit the typical familiar face of the aviation world. There were times he was rejected without reason or undervalued solely due to his appearance and background. He vividly recalled the sting of rejection, the skeptical look in the eyes of investors he approached, as though they couldn't believe that he, someone like him, could accomplish anything significant. To overcome these biases, Ethan persevered relentlessly, step by step, proving his worth until his achievements could no longer be ignored. But it seemed that success was not a strong enough shield to ward off all prejudice. Even standing at the peak of his career, he still faced these doubts and scrutiny. A sense of injustice weighed heavily within him, as though no matter how much he achieved, his very presence was always questioned by those unaccustomed to seeing someone like him in a position of power. When the technician returned, handing back the documents with a dismissive nod, he continued to look at Ethan with unrelenting suspicion. "Here are your papers," the technician said, his tone devoid of respect. "Everything seems to check out, but are you sure? Is this your plane?" This almost absurd question left Ethan momentarily stunned, but he quickly regained his composure. He nodded, his voice calm but with a sharp edge. "Yes, I've owned it for 3 years. My company operates several planes like this one." The technician shrugged slightly, as though he didn't truly believe what he was hearing. His gaze lingered on Ethan's face, void of any sign of respect. Nearby staff also started glancing at him, whispering among themselves. Ethan could sense the mix of curiosity and suspicion in their stares. Though he was used to situations like this, a feeling of unease crept into his heart, reminding him that his success couldn't entirely erase the invisible barriers he still faced. Taking a deep breath, Ethan tried to brush off the heavy feeling. He reminded himself that he was here for a greater purpose and that his work was more important than any doubts or whispers around him. Ethan stood still, trying to control his emotions as 2 police officers approached. Their silhouettes, along with the way they walked briskly, hands resting on their gun belts, instantly heightened the tension. Ethan could feel not just scrutinizing gazes but also a palpable lack of goodwill directed at him, as though he had done something wrong simply by being there. The older officer, a short, stocky man with close-cropped hair and sunglasses, stopped just a few steps away, staring at Ethan with a look full of suspicion. His voice was sharp, with a hint of contempt, breaking the silence. "Could you kindly step away from the plane?" he asked, his tone entirely lacking respect. "We received a report of suspicious activity at this airport, and we need to check your documents." Ethan maintained his composure, taking a silent, deep breath to keep his voice calm. "Hello, officers," he replied, trying to keep his demeanor professional. "I'm Ethan Sanders, the owner and pilot of this plane. I've already provided all necessary documents to the airport staff," but the officer had no intention of returning his greeting or even showing a shred of courtesy. He looked Ethan up and down as if assessing if something seemed suspicious about him. "Fine," he said curtly, "but we still need to see your documents right now, just in case. Hand them over." Keeping his expression neutral, Ethan retrieved his documents from his bag and handed them to the officer. Inside, he couldn't shake a sense of frustration and disappointment. Situations like this were nothing new, but each time he faced it, he couldn't help but feel insulted. Over the years, he had worked harder than most to prove himself, yet discrimination seemed to follow him wherever he went, regardless of his success or status. The younger officer, taller with a blank expression, took the documents from his colleague and leafed through them with an air of indifference. He flipped through each page carelessly, as if merely looking for an excuse to object. Every page he passed seemed to Ethan like an unnecessary survey, not to verify his identity, but to evaluate whether he was worthy of owning this plane. The younger officer looked Ethan up and down, smirking mockingly. "So you say this is your plane?" he asked, his tone full of sarcasm. "An expensive private plane like this?" Ethan met his gaze directly, replying succinctly, "Yes, that's correct. I've owned it for a few years and use it for my business." His voice remained calm, but irritation was beginning to kindle inside him. The older officer stepped closer, his expression still full of doubt and his tone slightly mocking. "Where are you headed, Mr. Owner?" he asked, emphasizing the word owner as though it were something unbelievable. "Not everyone can afford a private plane, you know," Ethan responded calmly, though the anger inside him was starting to boil. "I have an important meeting in New York," he said, striving to keep his voice steady despite his frustration. The younger officer, overhearing this, muttered under his breath, "Must be nice being rich, flying around like this. Pretty comfortable, huh?" The smirk on his face was intended to provoke, as though he were baiting Ethan into a reaction. For a brief moment, Ethan felt his hands clench. He wanted to respond, to call out this injustice, but he knew that even a single retort could be used as an excuse to increase the pressure on him. This was no longer a simple document check. It had become a test, a trial of Ethan's patience, and he understood that composure was the only way through. The older officer continued to examine Ethan's documents, then turned to his colleague and spoke loudly. "There's been a lot of fraud lately with assets like these. We can't just take someone's word for it based on a few scraps of paper." He looked at Ethan once more, his eyes filled with skepticism and thinly veiled contempt, as though he were searching for a flaw to expose. Ethan took a deep breath, meeting the officer's gaze and responding in a calm tone. "I understand you have a job to do, and I've cooperated by providing all required documents. But from what I'm seeing, this doesn't look like a standard check. It feels more like a personal confrontation." The younger officer sneered, a glint of provocation in his eyes. "So you know the law, huh? Then you should also know we have the right to conduct thorough checks when there's reasonable suspicion." He emphasized the words reasonable suspicion clearly, as though suggesting that Ethan didn't belong there. Feelings of insult, repressed anger, and injustice, all of these surrounded Ethan like a cloud. He knew that no matter how successful he was, there would always be people who couldn't accept his presence here. But Ethan refused to be defeated by it. He remained calm and replied, "I hope you carry out your duties impartially and professionally, as I have followed every necessary procedure." Airport staff nearby continued to watch the scene with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Ethan could feel the pressure of dozens of eyes focused on him, but he resolved not to let anyone see his unease, not to give anyone a reason to believe he had anything to fear. As the younger officer continued flipping through his documents with indifference and a mocking smile, Ethan knew they were just looking for any reason to detain him. Although anger roiled within him, Ethan reminded himself that patience and composure were the only ways to overcome this ordeal, once again proving that he didn't need anyone's approval to deserve what he had achieved. But as the situation grew more tense, Ethan decided it was time to seek his lawyer's help. He took out his phone and dialed the number for Madison Hayes, the lawyer he had long trusted. Madison was not only his lawyer, but also a friend, a companion who had helped him through many challenges and injustices. Her calm voice came through the line, and Ethan felt a renewed sense of strength. Madison Hayes was remarkable not only for her deep legal knowledge, but also for her decisiveness and unwavering resolve. For her clients, she was a sturdy wall they could rely on. For her opponents, she was someone who couldn't easily be swayed. She wasn't just a talented lawyer, but also a trusted friend. Throughout her career, Madison had handled many tough cases, yet she always stood firm, making decisions based on truth and justice. Ethan recalled a time when they worked together, a moment when he had nearly lost hope. Madison had never hesitated or wavered. She had looked him in the eye, given a small, reassuring smile, and said, "Don't worry, we'll find a way." Just a few simple words, yet Madison's confidence and determination gave him a powerful sense of hope. Whenever he worked with her, he always felt assured that she would never give up, no matter how great the challenges. In the courtroom, Madison embodied strength. Every word she spoke was measured, every action purposeful. She never overspoke, never backed down. Her colleagues often described her as someone unafraid of challenges, ready to take on anyone, as long as she knew she was standing for what was right. For her, justice was not just a job, but a mission. Hearing Madison's voice over the phone, Ethan knew he had chosen the right person. In this difficult moment, he needed someone like Madison, not just a skilled lawyer, but someone capable of making wise decisions, someone who would fight for him and for what was right until the end. "Madison, I'm at the airport and the police are detaining me for no valid reason," Ethan said, his voice controlled but unable to hide his frustration. "They keep asking for my documents, even though I've provided everything, and they're treating me like a suspect." There was a brief silence on the other end, and then Madison's voice grew serious, showing her commitment. "Stay calm, Ethan. Don't say anything more to them. I'll be there immediately. Let me handle this." Ethan nodded slightly, feeling a sense of reassurance wash over him. He knew Madison was someone who never tolerated injustice. She had the experience and determination to defend him, no matter who she was up against. While waiting for Madison, Ethan saw a couple enter the airport area, quickly making their way toward him. It was Evan and Sarah, two of his closest friends, and also his most important business partners. They had received Ethan's message and came immediately. Seeing the police and the tense situation, concern was evident on their faces. Evan, tall and with a resolute expression, approached Ethan first. "What's going on here, Ethan?" he asked, his voice full of concern and barely concealing his anger. "Why are they holding you without a clear reason?" Ethan quickly explained the situation he was facing. Sarah, usually gentle in demeanor but now visibly tense, shook her head in frustration. "This is unbelievable," she said, her voice indignant. "What are they even doing? There's no reason to hold you?" Just then, the older officer, who had been standing nearby observing, stepped forward with an irritated expression, his gaze wary as he saw Evan and Sarah getting involved. Crossing his arms over his chest, his tone was authoritative and disrespectful. "We're doing our job and we don't need anyone interfering. If you don't have business here, please leave." Evan didn't flinch, meeting the officer's gaze with determination. "As Ethan's business partner, I can confirm he's the lawful owner of this plane. What you're doing here is unnecessary and unreasonable," Evan said, his voice firm. Sarah stepped up beside Evan, her gaze equally resolute. "We know Ethan well, and he doesn't need to prove anything to you. These questions are just an abuse of authority." The officer sneered, refusing to back down. "We're just following protocol. Don't think that everyone with a fancy appearance is innocent. There are many cases of fraud, and we don't want to be fooled." This pointed remark only fueled Evan and Sarah's anger. Evan held back his frustration, his eyes reflecting his disapproval. "We're not asking for any special treatment, but we do expect you to do your job fairly, without baseless prejudice. All of Ethan's documents are valid. You have no reason to hold him any longer." At that moment, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the airport. Stepping out was Madison Hayes, exuding confidence and sharpness in her formal black suit. She walked directly toward Ethan and the group of police officers without hesitation, her gaze steady and ready to confront. "Hello, I'm Madison Hayes, the attorney representing Mr. Ethan Sanders," she announced, her voice sharp and strong. "I'd like to know why Mr. Sanders is being detained without reasonable grounds." The older officer looked momentarily unsettled by Madison's arrival, but tried to keep his composure. "We're just conducting a routine check due to a report of suspicious activity. This is standard procedure," he replied. Madison smirked slightly. "I see that Mr. Sanders has already provided all necessary documents, and what you're doing here shows signs of discrimination. You have no right to hold him without a search warrant, without specific evidence. This is an illegal detention, and I have grounds to file a lawsuit against you." Madison's firm words made the officer falter, though he still tried to respond. "We have the right to inspect when there's suspicion. This is a necessary procedure for security," he said. Madison didn't back down, her gaze piercing. "Security is necessary, but you have no right to detain someone without justified cause. If you continue creating difficulties, I'll request a search warrant against you to see who's violating the law here." The younger officer, watching Madison and her team with suspicion, finally realized that the situation was getting out of hand. He looked at the older officer with hesitation. After a moment of silence, the older officer shrugged and softened his tone. "Fine, but we'll keep monitoring the situation." Madison kept her expression cold, showing no sign of satisfaction. "Go ahead, but remember that I'll follow this case through to the end. Any illegal actions will be held accountable before the law." The confrontation ended, and the two officers withdrew, clearly feeling outmatched by Madison. Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him, along with deep gratitude toward Madison. She was not just his lawyer, she was his defender in his hardest moments. Madison turned to Ethan, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, don't worry. I won't let anyone infringe on your rights. We followed the law, and no one can bully you while I'm here." Evan and Sarah, standing right beside Ethan, looked at Madison with admiration. Sarah smiled slightly and added, "Ethan, we're not just business partners. We're friends. We'll always stand by your side, no matter what." Evan nodded in agreement. "You're not facing this alone, Ethan. Anyone who tries to tarnish your honor will have to go through us." Looking at his colleagues and his loyal friends, Ethan felt filled with gratitude and pride. They were not just co-workers, but people who would stand up for him and protect him in any situation. Ethan understood that in the fight against injustice, he was not alone, and this unity was his greatest strength. Madison approached the police officer again, looking him straight in the eyes. "I will ensure that this incident is recorded, and if necessary, we'll take further legal action. This isn't just an isolated case. It's an issue of human rights and justice." The officer said nothing more, simply turning away in defeat. Madison stood firm and confident, embodying not only a lawyer but a defender of justice. She turned to Ethan, signaling that everything had been resolved. "Let's go, Ethan," Madison said, her voice calm but filled with resolve and protection. As his friend and lawyer, Madison understood well what Ethan had endured. She looked at him with a serious gaze. "Let them understand that no one has the right to hassle you without just cause." Ethan nodded, feeling Madison's support. Beside him were not only his close friends, but also Sarah and Evan, two partners who stood by him in business and through difficult times. They had long become steadfast allies, united not only by common goals, but also by a bond of respect and solidarity in the face of every challenge. As the four of them walked down the street, they didn't need to say much. Their mere presence was enough to convey a powerful message. Facing the curious gazes of passers-by, Madison nodded slightly, silently affirming that Ethan had the right to be treated fairly, and she wouldn't let anyone pressure him unjustly. Evan, calm and the emotional anchor of the group, placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, instilling confidence and reassurance. "Don't worry, Ethan. We're here, and we won't let you face this alone." Though a business partner, Evan valued fairness and was always ready to help a teammate in any situation. Sarah, known for her frankness and always ready to fight for what's right, added firmly, "Exactly. No one has the right to bully others just because they hold power. We all deserve respect." Sarah always spoke up when she saw injustice, and this time she wasn't afraid to stand by Ethan. The group continued walking, each step growing more determined. With Madison, Sarah, and Evan by his side, Ethan felt his confidence returning. For him, this was not only a personal challenge, but also a journey to reclaim his voice, long suppressed. He knew that Madison, his friend and lawyer, was always ready to support and protect him, not only through legal channels, but with deep friendship. Madison led the way, her eyes serious as she looked back at the group who had caused Ethan trouble, those who often use their power to manipulate and impose. She turned to everyone, nodding confidently with a slight smile. "We're not here to provoke, but to affirm that Ethan has his rights. No one is allowed to treat anyone unfairly, especially when they've done nothing wrong." Evan, now standing by her side, added in a low voice, "Instead of confrontation, we'll show them that we stand firm for the respect we deserve." The four of them didn't need to say much. The calm determination in Madison's gaze and the steady attitude of the group were enough for the others to understand that they could no longer push Ethan around or put undue pressure on him. As a lawyer, Madison knew that sometimes the best approach was to display strength and confidence, never letting the other side see any sign of hesitation. Ethan felt his heart swell with a sense of peace and gratitude. His journey to fight for respect and justice had only just begun, but with these people by his side, he knew he would never feel alone. He looked at Madison, his most trusted friend, and realized that everything was starting to change. He had once felt lost and afraid, but now he knew he was no longer alone. "Thank you, everyone," Ethan said, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm truly lucky to have you here with me." Madison gently clasped his hand, giving a reassuring squeeze. "Ethan, I'm not just your lawyer. I'm your friend. We'll never let you face this alone." Her words brought Ethan strength and comfort. The group continued walking, not only as business partners, but as people who stood together, ready to face any challenge to protect their values and belief in justice. No matter how tough things might get, they knew that with unity, they could overcome anything. The incident involving Ethan at the airport that day drew the attention of several bystanders. One witness, outraged by how Ethan was being treated, quickly turned on their phone camera to record the events. They saw security personnel continually pressuring Ethan, even though he was fully cooperative and showed no suspicious behavior. The helpless look in Ethan's eyes as he faced scrutiny stirred anger in those watching, making them feel they could not just stand by. After the incident ended, the bystanders decided to share the video on social media. "We can't let this injustice go unheard," they thought. Along with the video, they wrote, "No one deserves to be treated like this based on someone's biased view." Soon, the video garnered hundreds of thousands of views and shares. The story didn't stop at an isolated incident. It became a symbol of discrimination and injustice that many people endure. From the first tweets and viral Facebook posts, people came together to speak out. The hashtag #JusticeForEthan quickly trended, receiving hundreds of thousands of shares and supportive comments. Many celebrities, human rights activists, and influential politicians publicly expressed their support for Ethan. They continued to share his story, promoting a message demanding fairness and accountability from the authorities involved. And Ethan, a private person by nature, initially just wanted the situation resolved quietly. But seeing the community stand by him, he realized that this was not just an opportunity to seek justice for himself, but also a chance to contribute to a larger movement. On television and in the press, interviews with Ethan and his lawyer, Madison Hayes, aired repeatedly. Madison appeared with confidence and determination, emphasizing that this incident was a clear case of discrimination and that such actions could not be condoned. "This is not just a personal incident, it's a systemic issue. We must stand up not only for Ethan, but for everyone who has suffered similar injustices," Madison said in an interview. Many news articles published details about the incident, openly criticizing the unprofessional conduct of the police and airport staff. Major newspapers and top online news sites pressured the police department and airport management to provide an explanation and implement concrete reforms. Countless articles called on people to share Ethan's story, demanding transparency and a commitment to change from those in power. Public pressure quickly forced the police department and airport to respond publicly. A week after the incident, the city police department's press room was packed with hundreds of reporters from large and small media outlets, as well as community representatives and several city council members. The atmosphere in the room was tense, a mixture of anticipation and simmering anger. Camera flashes went off continuously, heightening the pressure on those about to face the public. The representative for the police department, Lieutenant Jacob Bennett, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a serious demeanor, held the microphone tightly, clearing his throat as he prepared to speak. The tension was visible on his face, knowing that every eye was focused on his every word. On behalf of the entire city police department, Bennett began, we would like to extend our sincerest apologies to Mr. Ethan Sanders and his family. We regret that this incident occurred at the airport and subjected him to unfair treatment. This is not what we aim for in our mission to protect the community. A murmur arose from the back of the room, where a group of journalists exchanged glances. From the front row, a young reporter from a local newspaper quickly stood and asked, her voice clear, "Lieutenant Bennett, an apology isn't enough to appease the public. They want to know that no one else will have to endure what Mr. Sanders did. Does the police department have specific plans to prevent this from happening again?" Lieutenant Bennett took a deep breath, his eyes reflecting both tension and determination. "That's a question we've been asking ourselves over the past few days," he replied firmly. "And the answer is, we're not stopping at an apology. The police department has already started implementing a series of internal reforms to improve transparency and fairness in our work." Each time Bennett paused to emphasize a point, the sound of cameras clicking grew louder. Some reporters below took careful notes, their expressions intense, while others remained skeptical. When he finished his statement, a reporter from a major city newspaper stood up and asked, "Does the police department plan to work with the community to restore their trust? It's clear there has been a significant loss of trust following this incident." Lieutenant Bennett nodded. "We understand that trust can't be built on words alone. So we're taking steps to strengthen our collaboration with the community. We'll hold regular meetings where citizens can directly voice their concerns and help guide reforms. We want people to feel that they're part of this process of change." When the police department concluded, a representative from the airport stepped up to offer a public apology. His face pale and his eyes showing clear tension, he appeared to be under immense pressure from both the community and the media. "We sincerely apologize to Mr. Sanders and the community for the inconvenience and hardship he experienced. This has been a critical lesson for us, and we are committed to changing our procedures," he said, his tone earnest but slightly shaky. "We will revamp our employee training processes, ensuring that no one is judged based on appearance or personal factors. We will adhere to stricter protocols in handling special cases like this." The airport representative's statement offered some comfort to listeners, but the crowd's expressions remained serious. Many people were not only angered by what had happened to Mr. Sanders, but also concerned for others who might face similar situations in the future. The demand for change had evolved from a personal call to a collective voice of the entire community. In the crowd, an elderly woman stood up and spoke with an emotional voice. "We don't want apologies anymore. We need action. We need to know that none of us, our children, or our loved ones will be treated unfairly, just because they look different or come from communities less understood." The airport representative bowed his head, listening intently to each word as though engraving them in his mind. He reaffirmed the airport's commitment to transparency in implementing reforms, opening dialogues with community representatives to ensure the changes went beyond superficial improvements, creating a safer and fairer environment for everyone. The meeting ended and people left in thoughtful silence. Many felt that this was not just a change in procedural practice, but a significant step forward for the community. Mr. Sanders, who had quietly endured injustice, had now become a symbol of individual rights and community solidarity. Those who attended that day left with the hope that from now on, everyone would be treated fairly and with the respect they deserved. After the press conference, the community continued to apply pressure, demanding that the police and airport not only reform in theory, but also implement concrete measures with strict oversight to ensure lasting change. NGOs and human rights advocacy groups joined the cause, calling for clear policy changes to protect citizens' rights and prevent similar incidents from recurring. On social media, many called on these organizations to push for anti-discrimination protocols and closely monitor cases brought to public attention. Many citizens volunteered to share their own stories, recounting instances where they had been treated unfairly or dismissed simply because of their appearance or background. Ethan, once an observer, had now become a voice for many. He participated in televised interviews, sharing his personal experiences and encouraging others who had suffered injustices to stand up. This is not just my story. It's the story of everyone who has faced discrimination. We need change at the roots, and I believe that united, we can make a difference, Ethan said in an interview. His lawyer, Madison Hayes, also worked tirelessly to bring the case to court, seeking not only restitution for Ethan, but a precedent for future cases. We need an independent oversight system where voices like Ethan's can be heard and protected. We will fight to make real change happen, and we won't stop until justice is served, Madison said in a press conference, her eyes filled with determination. Under mounting public and media pressure, the police department was forced to conduct an internal investigation into the officers involved and apply disciplinary action against those who had violated conduct codes. Both the police and airport committed to establishing stricter oversight procedures and training staff to understand and respect human rights. Meanwhile, Ethan felt his story had become a powerful motivation for him to continue fighting for justice, not just for himself, but also for those who had no voice. Ethan and his colleagues, along with Madison, continued working with NGOs to promote community education campaigns and call for specific policy changes. Ethan's story had moved beyond personal borders, becoming a symbol of hope and determination, representing the community's unity in fighting against injustice. Seeing the widespread support, he felt he had contributed to a pivotal change for the community. Ethan concluded an interview with a powerful message. We can't control the biases others place on us, but we can control how we stand up to them. I believe that significant change begins with small actions, and when we unite, nothing is impossible. Let's create a society that's fair and respectful for everyone, not just for me, but for all. After the storm at the airport subsided, Ethan began to realize that what he had experienced was not just a personal incident, but part of a deeper systemic issue. The outpouring of support from everywhere gave him strength, and he understood that this was an opportunity to do something greater and more meaningful, not just for himself, but for the community. His painful experience would not end merely with seeking justice. It would mark the beginning of a new journey, a journey to create real change. One afternoon, Ethan invited his two close partners, Evan and Sarah, to his office to discuss a plan he had been contemplating carefully. In the spacious room, sunlight streamed in through the large windows, filling the space with brightness and energy, promising the weight of significant decisions ahead. Evan sat down across from Ethan, placing his hot coffee cup on the table. He looked at Ethan with curiosity, but also a hint of concern. Ethan, I can tell you've been thinking a lot lately. Is there something you want to share with us? Ethan sat up straight, his eyes shining with passion, though there was still a trace of anxiety. Honestly, I can't stop thinking about what happened at the airport. It's not just because I was treated unfairly, but because I realize how many others out there suffer from the same prejudices, judgments, and discrimination without a voice. Sarah nodded gently, showing empathy. You're right, Ethan. What you went through is something no one deserves to experience. But I sense you have something bigger in mind. Ethan leaned forward, his voice deepening but filled with determination. I want to create an organization, a support fund for people facing discrimination. I want to give them a voice, protection, and a chance to thrive without being held back by skin color, origin, or any bias. Evan and Sarah looked at him, their expressions filled with surprise and admiration. You mean an organization that could provide legal support, education, and even skill-building programs, right? Evan asked, his eyes lighting up. Ethan nodded, starting to share more details of his plan. Exactly. I want to create a support network that anyone can turn to when they face injustice. Not everyone has the means or knows how to protect themselves in situations like this. I want to ensure that anyone, no matter where they are or their background, has the chance to defend themselves. Sarah smiled proudly. Ethan, this is a wonderful idea. It's not just a reaction to what happened to you. It's a real way to create lasting change in society. Ethan looked at his two friends, feeling deeply moved. We've worked together since the early days of this company. Now I want us to expand our mission, not only in business, but in creating positive social impact. This is more than just a support fund. It's a mission I want us to undertake together. Evan gently patted Ethan's shoulder, showing deep empathy. You're not alone in this journey, Ethan. I fully support this plan. We can use our financial strength and influence to create something truly meaningful. Sarah nodded in agreement, adding, think of how many people we could help. Not everyone has a voice like you, Ethan, and if we can give them that voice, it's priceless. Ethan looked at both of them, feeling his strength renewed by the support of his partners. He continued sharing specifics about the programs he envisioned for the support fund, including scholarships for underprivileged youth, soft skills training, psychological counseling for those scarred by discrimination, and especially legal aid programs. Evan enthusiastically suggested we should partner with NGOs and experts in the field to expand the fund's reach. They have experience and resources, and together we can build a strong team to implement this project. Sarah, with her project management experience, quickly added her input. We'll also need a monitoring and evaluation system to ensure every dollar from the fund brings real value to the community. And I think we should connect with schools and social organizations to create a broad support network. Ethan felt more excited than ever. This is exactly why I wanted to work on this project with you. Each of us brings different strengths, and together we can create an organization that not only helps, but also builds trust and pride within the community. After some discussion, the three agreed that this support fund would not just be an ordinary charity project, but a long-term commitment of the company to society. They decided to name it the Equity and Hope Fund, a name that reflected both its goals and profound meaning. Ethan said, I also want this to be a place where people not only seek help in difficult times, but also build their future. We'll support vocational training programs, scholarships, and skills courses to help them rise and confidently move forward. Sarah smiled, her eyes sparkling. Exactly. We're not just helping them get through hardships, we're giving them a chance to grow. This is the best way to create lasting change. The conversation continued until the sun had set, and the three remained engrossed in the detailed plans for the support fund. Each idea, each suggestion was carefully considered to ensure that the Equity and Hope Fund would truly benefit the community, protect the voiceless, and create opportunities for those limited by discrimination. As the meeting ended, Ethan looked at Evan and Sarah with a powerful sense of conviction. Thank you for always supporting and trusting me. We'll turn this idea into reality and create the change I believe we all yearn for. Evan placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his eyes shining. That's why we're here, because we know we can do something bigger. We're not just partners, we're family. Sarah nodded, and family always stands by each other. We'll do everything we can to build this fund and make it a source of hope for the community. Ethan smiled, feeling his heart swell with pride and determination. With the support of Evan and Sarah, he knew that the Equity and Hope Fund would not just remain an idea on paper, but would become a real organization that would change the lives of those in need. That evening, the office lights remained on, reflecting on the radiant faces of three friends and three teammates. And from that moment, a new journey had begun. A journey not only to protect rights, but also to spread hope, build trust, and bring justice for all. After his conversation with Evan and Sarah about the Equity and Hope Fund, Ethan felt his spirit elevated to new heights. All the hardships and experiences of discrimination he had endured now fueled his dedication to a greater cause. He didn't just want to seek justice for himself, he wanted to build a fair future for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. Ethan walked out of the airport with the city lights twinkling in the distance, his heart filled with determination. As he got into his car and drove home, the vision of the support fund kept appearing in his mind, reinforcing the necessity of this mission. He pictured what he wanted the Equity and Hope Fund to achieve in the coming years. It would not only be a support organization, but a foundation to build trust, spark hope, and give marginalized individuals the opportunity to assert their worth. Upon reaching home, Ethan sat at his desk, took out a notebook, and began writing down every idea and every goal for the fund. If we can help others rise, we can create a stronger community where everyone has a voice, he told himself. Concrete plans for the Equity and Hope Fund began to take clearer shape in his mind. Ethan knew that many people faced unjust situations, but lacked the resources to defend themselves. He wanted his fund to provide free legal support services to those in need, empowering them to stand up for their rights without fear. Everyone deserves protection, and justice shouldn't be reserved only for those who can afford it, he wrote. Ethan realized that a significant barrier to the personal and professional development of those facing discrimination was the lack of educational and skill-building opportunities. He wanted the fund to offer scholarships to students from disadvantaged backgrounds, especially those affected by discrimination. In addition, Ethan planned to implement programs for soft skills and professional training to help individuals build a solid foundation for growth. Discrimination not only has legal impacts, but also deeply affects mental well-being. Ethan wanted his support fund to provide free counseling services, helping people overcome trauma and rebuild their confidence. He envisioned workshops and community support groups where people could share their stories, seek empathy, and encourage one another through adversity. Ethan also wanted the fund to play an educational role within the community through media campaigns, workshops, and conferences, raising awareness about discrimination and ways to prevent it. He wanted the community to understand that fairness and equality are fundamental values everyone deserves. Once he had written down all his ideas, Ethan felt a calm yet determined resolve. He knew that implementing these plans wouldn't be easy and would require effort, time, and patience. But looking at what his recent struggle had accomplished, he believed that this fund could truly change the lives of hundreds, even thousands of people. A few days later, Ethan held a meeting with his entire staff to announce his plan to establish the Equity and Hope Fund. The meeting room was packed, and all eyes were on Ethan as he stepped onto the podium. With a confident voice, he shared his story and why he wanted to create this fund. He spoke of the hardships he had faced and his hope that the fund would be a place where people could turn to overcome similar obstacles. When he outlined the programs for legal support, scholarships, skills training, and psychological counseling, the room fell silent. Everyone listened intently and with emotion. Many were surprised at the extent of Ethan's resolve. When he finished his speech, the room erupted in applause, filled with empathy and enthusiasm. A longtime employee stepped forward saying, "Ethan, you've inspired all of us. We're proud to join you on this journey." Ethan smiled, nodding in thanks. He knew this was a long journey, but with everyone's support, he believed good things would come. Ethan's vision extended beyond just creating a fund. He wanted to partner with NGOs, universities, and even other corporations to expand the fund's reach. He hoped to hold annual workshops and forums to raise awareness, encouraging more people to join the fight for justice. Ethan envisioned educational programs in schools, where children could learn to respect differences and understand the value of fairness and human rights from a young age. In the years to come, he hoped the Equity and Hope Fund would grow strong, becoming an influential organization that not only helped individuals, but also sparked a wave of societal change. That night, Ethan sat alone in his office, looking out at the night sky with a sense of peace, yet filled with determination. The stars twinkling above seemed to bolster his faith in a brighter future. He knew that his journey would face many challenges ahead, but with each person he helped, he would get closer to his goal of creating a more just and compassionate society. The Equity and Hope Fund would be his legacy, not just as a charitable organization, but as a symbol of the relentless pursuit of rights and equality for everyone. Ethan's fight for justice was far from over, and he would not stop until he brought about real change. After completing his last tasks at the company, Ethan returned home, carrying a sense of peace mixed with determination. The past few days had not only been a personal challenge, but a turning point in his life. Previously, Ethan thought success was simply achieving business goals, creating impact, and building wealth. But through all the recent events, he realized that true success was much more. It was the ability to use his voice and resources to help others overcome hardship and injustice. That evening, his quiet living room was filled with soft light from a table lamp, creating a peaceful space for Ethan to reflect. He sat by the window, gazing at the twinkling city lights in the distance, replaying each moment of his recent journey. Memories of the airport, the skeptical stares, and the prejudiced remarks of those in power remained vivid in his mind. But now, those memories no longer caused him pain. They had become his motivation to continue his path toward justice. He recalled his early days as a young man entering the business world, driven by a desire to succeed and prove his worth. Having faced numerous challenges and difficulties, he had worked tirelessly to reach his current position. However, his recent experiences made him realize that personal achievements were only a small part of life. The true value of success wasn't in wealth or fame, but in how we can use it to create good for others. He thought about the Equity and Hope Fund, his passion project. The plans and goals for the fund were no longer just words on paper. They were the beginning of a greater mission, to give a voice and power to those unable to defend themselves. He pictured each program the fund would implement, from providing legal aid to victims of discrimination, offering educational scholarships to disadvantaged youth, to running skills training programs to help them build careers. Each program and each activity was a step toward building a strong community where everyone was respected and had equal opportunities to grow. As he reflected, Ethan felt clearer than ever about his purpose. The Equity and Hope Fund would not just be a support organization. It would be a symbol of determination and courage. He wanted it to be a place where everyone, regardless of race, background, or living conditions, could come to find support. He wanted those facing hardship to feel that they were not alone and that there were people ready to stand by them and help them overcome obstacles. Ethan continued jotting down ideas in his notebook, envisioning the fund's future: awareness workshops on discrimination, life skills, professional skills, training programs, and fundraising events to expand and reach more people in need. He even thought about establishing support centers in various cities, creating a wide network that people could trust and rely on in times of need. His journey didn't end with creating a charitable organization. He wanted his story and the mission of the fund to spread so that everyone understood that fairness and compassion were values worth fighting to protect. Every individual has the right to be treated fairly, and it's our responsibility to create a society where no one is left behind, Ethan told himself, his heart filled with faith and hope. His gaze drifted over the distant buildings, imagining future encounters with people he would help. Young people hungry for knowledge and opportunity, workers in need of protection, and families in need of support. The image of those faces came to mind, each person carrying a story and a dream, and Ethan knew he would do whatever it took to help make those dreams a reality. Alongside running the fund, Ethan also planned to participate in conferences, forums, and even public talks to share his story. He wanted to use his journey and the experiences he had endured to inspire and encourage others to stand up for their rights. Ethan understood that he couldn't change everything alone, but he believed that every action, however small, could ripple out and create positive effects. With clear plans and unwavering faith, Ethan felt his heart lighten. He no longer saw himself as a victim of discrimination, but as a pioneer in the fight for justice. He believed that patience and courage would lead him further on this path. With every person he helped and every change he brought, he would be one step closer to his dream of an equal society, where everyone could live with dignity. As Ethan sat quietly in the dim room, his eyes gazed toward the distant horizon. He felt a sense of peace, but also the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The coming days wouldn't be easy, but Ethan was ready to face every challenge. He knew this was only the beginning, that his journey would continue, and he would not stop until his dream of a fair society became a reality. Ethan's story was not just about a legal battle or a support fund. It was about a man determined to make a difference, standing up for the values he believed in. And in his steady gaze toward the future, it was clear that Ethan would continue to fight, not just for himself, but for everyone who needed him. Ethan stood up, a gentle smile on his face. He knew he was no longer alone on this journey, and that with each step forward, he was helping to build a better world. A world where everyone had the chance to rise and live, true to their worth. This story has shown us the power of truth and how prejudice can complicate things unnecessarily. What do you think might have happened if the police had acted fairly from the start? Would the outcome have been different? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next compelling stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.
The clock on Marcus Johnson's desk showed 11:30 p.m. as he gathered his papers into his leather briefcase. The lights in the district attorney's office had dimmed hours ago, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the important case files he'd been reviewing. At 35, Marcus had already made a name for himself as one of the city's most dedicated assistant district attorneys, known for his attention to detail and unwavering commitment to justice. He straightened his navy blue tie and checked his reflection in his office window. Even after 14 hours at work, his appearance remained sharp, his suit pressed, his stance confident. Marcus had learned early in life that as a black man in America, his appearance mattered more than it should. The parking garage was nearly empty when he walked to his car, his footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. His new BMW gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a reward to himself after winning a major corruption case last month. The leather seats welcomed him as he settled in, placing his briefcase carefully on the passenger seat. The city streets were quiet as Marcus drove through downtown, past the closed shops and dimly lit restaurants. His mind wandered to the case he'd been preparing, a complex drug trafficking operation that needed his full attention. He'd recently moved to Cedar Heights, an affluent neighborhood on the city's north side. The decision to buy a house there had raised some eyebrows, but Marcus believed in breaking barriers. Why shouldn't a successful black professional live in one of the city's best areas? As he turned onto Maple Drive, just 2 blocks from his new home, blue and red lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Marcus checked his speed. He'd been driving exactly at the limit. Years of experience had taught him to always be careful, especially in this neighborhood where he still felt like an outsider to some. He did everything by the book. Marcus turned on his interior lights, placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, and waited. In his side mirror, he could see 2 officers approaching, one on each side of his car. Their hands rested casually on their weapons, a detail that didn't escape Marcus's attention. Well, what do we have here? The officer on the driver's side shined his flashlight directly into Marcus's face, even though the car's interior was already well lit. His nameplate read Sullivan. Little late for a joyride in this neighborhood, isn't it? Marcus kept his voice steady and professional. Good evening, officer. Is there a problem? Officer Sullivan's partner, whose nameplate read Cooper, circled to the passenger side, peering through the windows with exaggerated interest. Nice car, Cooper commented, his tone suggesting he didn't believe it could belong to the man behind the wheel. Real nice car. License and registration? Sullivan demanded, not bothering to answer Marcus's question or explain why he'd been pulled over. Of course, Marcus replied calmly. My registration is in the glove compartment, and my license is in my wallet. I'm going to reach for them now. He narrated his movements carefully, a habit he'd developed over years of similar encounters. As he reached for the glove compartment, Cooper's hand tightened on his weapon. Watch his hand, Sullivan. Marcus could feel his heart racing, but his face remained composed. He'd been in this situation before, but it never got easier. The registration retrieved, he slowly reached for his wallet next. You know, Sullivan said, examining Marcus's license with obvious skepticism, we've had some reports of suspicious vehicles in the area. Lots of break-ins lately. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? No, sir, Marcus replied. I live in this neighborhood, 1242 Maple Drive, just around the corner. Both officers exchanged glances, and Cooper let out a short, mocking laugh. Right, and I'm the President of the United States. Sir, step out of the vehicle, Sullivan ordered, his hand now fully resting on his weapon. Marcus knew this moment well, the crucial point where situations either de-escalated or spiraled out of control. As he prepared to comply, he noticed something that gave him a flutter of hope. Both officers were wearing body cameras. Whatever happened next would be recorded, documented, and eventually judged. Little did Officers Sullivan and Cooper know, they weren't dealing with just any black man in a nice car. They were about to learn a hard lesson about prejudice, power, and justice. But that revelation would have to wait for another day. Marcus stepped out of his BMW slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. The night air was cool against his face, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Officer Sullivan stood uncomfortably close, while Officer Cooper maintained his position near the passenger side, his hand still resting on his weapon. Spread your legs, hands on the car, Sullivan ordered, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction that made Marcus's stomach turn. As he complied, Marcus could feel the rough treatment that followed wasn't necessary. Sullivan's pat-down was more aggressive than protocol required. So, you say you live around here? Cooper called out, his tone dripping with sarcasm. He walked over, swinging his flashlight beam across Marcus's expensive suit. "In Cedar Heights? What exactly do you do for a living that lets you afford this neighborhood?" Marcus kept his voice steady, despite the humiliation of his current position. "I'm a legal professional." Sullivan laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Legal professional? What, like a paralegal or something?" "Man, probably just works in the mailroom," Cooper added, both officers sharing a laugh at their own jokes. Marcus could feel his anger rising, but years of experience in the courtroom had taught him to control his emotions. He knew that any sign of aggression, any hint of justified anger, would only make the situation worse. Instead, he focused on memorizing every word, every action, knowing each detail would be important later. "My house is just around the corner," Marcus said calmly. "If you'd like to follow me there, I can prove my residency." "Oh, we'll get to that," Sullivan said, finishing his pat down with an unnecessarily rough push. "But first, why don't you explain why your windows are tinted? That looks a little dark to me." Marcus knew his windows were exactly at the legal limit. He'd made sure of that when he bought the car. "The tint is within legal requirements, Officer Sullivan. I made sure of that during purchase." "Oh, so now you're an expert on vehicle codes too," Cooper mocked, walking closer. "Listen to this guy, Sullivan. He knows all about legal requirements." Marcus noticed Cooper's body camera blinking, recording everything. He spoke clearly, ensuring every word would be captured. "Officers, I understand you're doing your job, but I haven't committed any traffic violations. I provided my license and registration, which prove both my identity and my vehicle ownership. Is there anything else you need from me?" Sullivan stepped closer, his face just inches from Marcus's. "You know what I need? I need you to drop the attitude. You think that fancy suit and nice car make you special, make you above the law." "No, sir," Marcus replied steadily. "I have great respect for the law. That's why hands where I can see them." Cooper suddenly shouted as Marcus shifted slightly. "Sullivan, he's reaching." Marcus froze, his heart pounding. He hadn't moved his hands from the car, and they all knew it. But he also knew this dangerous game, how quickly a routine stop could turn deadly over imagined movements. "I haven't moved my hands, Officer Cooper," Marcus said loudly and clearly, making sure the body cameras captured his compliance. "They're still exactly where Officer Sullivan placed them." "What's in your pocket?" Sullivan demanded, though he just finished searching Marcus moments ago. "You just searched me, officer. You know what's in my pockets: my wallet, my phone, and my house keys." "Getting smart with us now?" Cooper asked, moving closer. "You think you're smarter than us?" Marcus remained silent, knowing anything he said would only be twisted against him. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. These officers were building a case against themselves with every word, every action, every abuse of power. Their body cameras continued recording, gathering evidence that would eventually come back to haunt them. "Well, Mr. Legal Professional," Sullivan sneered, reaching for his handcuffs. "Since you want to be difficult, maybe a trip to the station will help adjust your attitude. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest." As the cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Marcus kept his face neutral. Inside, though, his legal mind was already at work. Every second of this encounter would be reviewed, every word analyzed, every action scrutinized. These officers had no idea they were giving him exactly what he needed: clear, documented evidence of racial profiling and police misconduct. The handcuffs bit into Marcus's wrists as Officer Sullivan led him toward the patrol car. His expensive suit jacket bunched uncomfortably around his shoulders, and he could feel the night air cooling the sweat on his forehead. Behind them, Officer Cooper was calling for a tow truck to impound Marcus's BMW. "You know," Marcus said calmly, speaking loudly enough for both body cameras to pick up his words, "this is a clear violation of my civil rights." Sullivan tightened the handcuffs in response. "Oh, look at that, Cooper. Our friend here is a civil rights expert now." "Bet he learned that watching Law and Order," Cooper laughed, walking over to join them. He held Marcus's phone in his hand, the screen still recording. "Trying to film us, huh? That's cute." Marcus had positioned his phone on the dashboard when he was first pulled over, a habit he'd developed over years of similar encounters. Recording police interactions is a protected right under the First Amendment, he stated clearly. Man, you just don't know when to shut up, do you? Sullivan grabbed Marcus's arm roughly, spinning him around. You think quoting laws makes you special? Makes you better than us? A car drove past slowly, its occupants watching the scene unfold. Marcus noticed the driver slowing down, likely recording with their phone. More evidence. More witnesses. I'm simply stating facts, Officer Sullivan, Marcus replied, maintaining his composure. Facts that will be relevant very soon. Cooper stepped closer, his face twisted with anger. Is that a threat? No, sir, just another fact. Sullivan yanked open the patrol car's back door. Get in the car, smartass. Let's see how many facts you know after a night in lockup. As Marcus began to lower his head to enter the car, he noticed something that made him pause. Officer Sullivan, your body camera appears to be loose. You might want to adjust it to ensure proper recording. Both officers froze for a split second. Sullivan's hand instinctively went to his camera, which was indeed hanging at an odd angle. A flash of uncertainty that crossed his face told Marcus everything he needed to know. These officers weren't as confident as they pretended to be. Mind your own business and get in the car, Sullivan snapped, shoving Marcus's head down. The patrol car's backseat was cold and uncomfortable. Through the partition, Marcus could hear the officers discussing what to do with his car. His BMW, containing his briefcase with sensitive case files, was about to be impounded. This was no longer just about him. There were now ethical implications regarding client confidentiality. Officers, Marcus called out, there are confidential legal documents in my briefcase, under attorney-client privilege. Under what? Cooper mocked, turning around in the passenger seat. You watch too many lawyer shows, boy. Maybe a night without your fancy car and fancy briefcase will teach you some respect. Marcus fell silent, watching through the window as a tow truck arrived. He observed every detail, the time on the dashboard clock reading 11:52 p.m., the badge numbers of both officers clearly visible in the streetlight, the way Sullivan's body camera continued to hang askew as he supervised the towing of the BMW. The drive to the police station was filled with more snide comments and veiled threats from the officers. They seemed to grow bolder with each passing minute, apparently believing their victim was just another angry black man they could intimidate into submission. You know what I think? Sullivan said, glancing at Marcus in the rearview mirror. I think you're just another one who bought a nice car and a fancy suit to pretend you're something you're not. Probably borrowed that car anyway. Or stole it. Cooper added with a laugh. Marcus leaned back against the seat, his mind already composing the complaints he would file. Every taunt, every violation of procedure, every moment of racial profiling was being carefully catalogued in his trained legal mind. These officers had no idea they were building his case with every word they spoke. As the patrol car pulled into the station's parking lot, Marcus allowed himself a small, quiet smile. In their arrogance and prejudice, Officers Sullivan and Cooper had given him exactly what he needed: clear, irrefutable evidence of systemic racism in action. Soon, very soon, they would learn the true cost of their actions. The police station buzzed with late-night activity as Officers Sullivan and Cooper led Marcus through the front doors. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Marcus noticed several other officers glancing their way, some with curiosity, others with indifference to what they likely saw as just another arrest. "Look what we caught prowling around Cedar Heights," Sullivan announced loudly to the booking sergeant, a heavy-set man with graying hair. "Mr. Legal Professional here thinks he's above the law." The booking sergeant barely looked up from his computer. "Charges?" "Disorderly conduct and resisting arrest," Cooper replied, roughly pushing Marcus forward. "Found him acting suspicious in a high-end neighborhood." Marcus stood quietly, watching the booking sergeant type. He noticed the nameplate on the desk read Sergeant Williams. Every detail mattered: names, times, witnesses. His years as a prosecutor had taught him the importance of documentation. "Name?" Sergeant Williams asked, finally looking up at Marcus. Before Marcus could answer, Sullivan cut in. "Says he's some kind of lawyer." He laughed, encouraging others to join in. A few nearby officers smirked, but others seemed uncomfortable with the obvious mockery. "Marcus Johnson," Marcus stated clearly, maintaining his professional tone. "And I'd like to make my phone call." "Oh, you know your rights, do you?" Cooper sneered. "Probably got that from watching cop shows." Sergeant Williams typed the name into his computer. Suddenly, his fingers froze over the keyboard. His eyes widened slightly as he stared at the screen. He looked up at Marcus, then back at the screen, then at Sullivan and Cooper. "Officers," Sergeant Williams said carefully, "could I speak with you for a moment?" But before he could say more, another voice boomed across the booking area. "What the hell is going on here?" Everyone turned to see Lieutenant Garcia striding toward them, his face a mask of concern. He had just walked in from the back office and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw Marcus. "Mr. Johnson?" Lieutenant Garcia said, his voice filled with recognition. "What are you doing here?" Sullivan and Cooper exchanged nervous glances. The atmosphere in the room shifted noticeably. "Good evening, Lieutenant Garcia," Marcus replied calmly. "Officers Sullivan and Cooper arrested me for, as they put it, acting suspicious in my own neighborhood." The lieutenant's face darkened. "Uncuff him, now." Sullivan hesitated. "Sir, he was resisting." "I said uncuff him." Lieutenant Garcia's voice left no room for argument. "That's Assistant District Attorney Johnson you've arrested." The sound of keys fumbling and handcuffs clicking open filled the sudden silence. Marcus rubbed his wrists gently, noting the red marks left by the too tight cuffs. More evidence for later. "Mr. Johnson," Lieutenant Garcia said, his tone apologetic, "my office, please. Officers Sullivan and Cooper, you too." As they walked toward the lieutenant's office, Marcus could hear the whispers starting behind them. He caught fragments of conversations. "That's the ADA, the one who prosecuted the Martinez case. They arrested a prosecutor." Inside the lieutenant's office, Garcia closed the door and turned to face them. "Mr. Johnson, I cannot begin to express." Marcus held up his hand politely. "Lieutenant, with all due respect, I'd prefer to save the official conversations for later. Right now, I'd just like my phone call. I need to check on my car, which these officers had impounded, containing confidential case files." Sullivan and Cooper stood rigid, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. They watched as Marcus pulled out his business card, which they hadn't bothered to look at during their search, and handed it to Lieutenant Garcia. "I'll be filing a formal complaint," Marcus said quietly. "Multiple complaints, actually, and I trust the body camera footage will be preserved." "Of course," Garcia replied quickly. "I'll personally ensure." "Thank you," Marcus interrupted smoothly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some calls to make. Oh, and officers?" He turned to Sullivan and Cooper, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "I'll be seeing you in court very soon, but not quite the way you imagined." As Marcus walked out of the office, leaving behind two stunned officers and their embarrassed lieutenant, he allowed himself a small smile. The wheels of justice were already turning, and for once, they were turning in the right direction. The morning after his arrest, Marcus sat in his office at the district attorney's building, his coffee untouched on his desk. His suit from the previous night had been replaced with a fresh one, but the memory of those handcuffs still burned around his wrists. On his computer screen, he studied Officers Sullivan and Cooper's personnel files, which had been quickly provided after his call to Internal Affairs. A knock on his door interrupted his reading. "Come in," Marcus called out, already knowing who it would be. District Attorney Sarah Martinez, his direct supervisor and mentor of 5 years, entered the office. Her face showed the concern she'd expressed during their midnight phone call. "Marcus, how are you holding up?" "I'm fine," he replied, turning his computer screen so she could see it. "Did you know Officer Sullivan has had 3 other complaints of racial profiling in the past 2 years? All dismissed due to lack of evidence." Sarah pulled up a chair and sat down. "Marcus, you don't have to handle this yourself. We can assign another prosecutor to review their cases." Marcus shook his head. "No, I need to do this personally." He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file. "I've already started reviewing every case where these officers were key witnesses. Their credibility is now in question." "You've been here all night, haven't you?" Sarah asked, noticing the multiple coffee cups and takeout containers in his trash bin. "I couldn't sleep anyway," Marcus admitted. He turned to his computer and pulled up the body camera footage that Internal Affairs had sent over. "Watch this." Together, They viewed the footage of his arrest. Every snide comment, every unnecessary push, every violation of protocol played out in high definition. Sarah's face grew darker with each passing minute. "This is," she started. "Typical," Marcus finished, but this time they picked the wrong target. He opened another file on his computer. "I found 5 other similar incidents in Cedar Heights alone, all involving minority drivers, all dismissed because it was their word against the officers." Sarah leaned back in her chair, understanding dawning on her face. "You're going to use your case to reopen those incidents?" Marcus nodded. "These officers aren't just racially profiling people, they're lying on official reports. That calls into question every arrest they've made, every testimony they've given." He pulled up another document. "I've already drafted a motion to review all cases where their testimony was crucial to conviction." "The police union won't like this," Sarah warned. "The police union doesn't have body camera footage of their officers openly mocking a prosecutor and violating department policies." Marcus played another clip. "Look here. Officer Sullivan deliberately adjusted his camera to point away during part of the search. That's against department policy." Sarah watched Marcus for a moment, seeing not just her assistant DA, but a man who had found his mission. "What do you need from me?" "Official authorization to handle all cases involving Officers Sullivan and Cooper moving forward." Marcus handed her a prepared document. "And your support when this gets ugly, because it will." Sarah took the paper, reading it carefully. "You know this could affect your working relationship with the police department." Marcus gestured to his screen, where the footage showed Cooper mocking his profession. "That relationship needs to change anyway. Someone has to take a stand." Sarah signed the authorization and handed it back. "Just be careful, Marcus. These kinds of cases can get personal." "It already is personal," Marcus replied, pulling up more files. "But I'm going to handle it professionally. Every I dotted, every T crossed. When I'm done, these officers won't just face disciplinary action. They'll become an example of why systemic change is necessary." As Sarah left his office, Marcus turned back to his computer. On his screen, dozens of case files awaited review, each one a potential story of injustice, each one a chance to make things right. His phone buzzed with a message. The body camera footage had been secured and backed up in 3 different locations. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Officers Sullivan and Cooper had no idea what was coming, but they were about to learn a valuable lesson about the true meaning of justice. 2 weeks after the arrest, Officers Sullivan and Cooper strode confidently into courtroom 306. They had testified in this courtroom dozens of times before, and today seemed like just another routine appearance. They were scheduled to testify in a drug possession case, the kind of case they handled almost every month. "Easy in and out," Sullivan said to Cooper as they walked through the heavy wooden doors. "We'll be done in time for lunch." The courtroom was already filling up with the usual morning crowd: lawyers in suits, defendants with their families, court officers standing guard. Sullivan and Cooper made their way to their usual waiting area, nodding to familiar faces. "Something feels different today," Cooper mentioned, noticing several senior police officials seated in the gallery. "Why's the brass here?" Sullivan shrugged, adjusting his uniform. "Probably some high-profile case after hours." The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Thompson entered, her face unreadable as she took her seat. "Good morning," she said, scanning the courtroom. "We're here for case number 2024 CR 789, People v. Richardson." The defense attorney stood up, a face Sullivan and Cooper knew well, but when the prosecutor's chair remained empty, a murmur went through the courtroom. "Where's Davis?" Cooper whispered to Sullivan, referring to the usual prosecutor. "He's never late." The heavy doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Sullivan and Cooper turned around casually to see who was entering. Their faces froze. Walking confidently toward the prosecutor's table was Marcus Johnson, dressed in an impeccable charcoal gray suit. He carried his leather briefcase, the same one that had been in his BMW the night of the arrest. His face showed no emotion as he placed his briefcase on the table and began arranging his files. Sullivan grabbed Cooper's arm. That's the guy we arrested." Cooper finished, his voice barely a whisper. The color had drained from both their faces. Marcus looked up, making direct eye contact with them. He gave them a small, professional nod before turning to address the judge. "Good morning, Your Honor. Marcus Johnson for the people. I apologize if I'm a few seconds late." "Not at all, Mr. Johnson," Judge Thompson replied. "Though I admit I'm surprised to see you handling this case. Wasn't David Davis assigned to this?" "There's been a reassignment, Your Honor," Marcus replied smoothly. "If I may approach to explain?" As Marcus walked up to the judge's bench, Sullivan and Cooper sat rigid in their seats. They watched as he handed the judge several documents, speaking too quietly for them to hear. Judge Thompson's eyebrows rose as she read the papers. "I see," she said finally. "Very well, Mr. Johnson. You may proceed." Marcus returned to his table and opened his briefcase. The sound of the latches clicking seemed unusually loud in the tense courtroom. He pulled out a stack of files, each one labeled with dates and case numbers. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice clear and strong, "before we proceed with today's case, the people need to address some serious concerns about the credibility of our witnesses." Sullivan felt his stomach drop. Cooper's hands began to shake slightly. "Officers Sullivan and Cooper," Marcus continued, turning to face them, "would you please approach the witness stand? We have some matters to discuss regarding the night of January 16th and several other incidents that have recently come to light." The two officers stood on shaky legs. As they walked to the witness stand, they could feel all eyes in the courtroom on them. The senior police officials in the gallery leaned forward, their faces stern. The defense attorney looked confused but intrigued. Marcus picked up the first file from his stack. On its cover, they could see their own names clearly written. Below them, in bold letters, were the words, "Pattern and Practice of Racial Profiling. Internal Affairs Investigation #2024-47. "Officers," Marcus said, opening the file, "let's talk about your activities in Cedar Heights, shall we?" The courtroom fell silent as Marcus began his questioning. Officers Sullivan and Cooper sat in the witness box, their earlier confidence completely gone. The morning sun streaming through the high windows cast long shadows across their faces, which had grown increasingly pale. "Officer Sullivan," Marcus began, his voice steady and professional, "please tell the court about your department's policy regarding body cameras." Sullivan cleared his throat. They must be on during all civilian interactions and positioned correctly to capture everything." "Correct," Marcus said, turning to switch on the courtroom's large display screen. "Now, let's watch what happened to your body camera during our interaction 2 weeks ago." The footage played, showing Sullivan deliberately adjusting his camera angle during the search. Several people in the gallery shook their heads. The senior police officials watching from the back row scribbled notes. "Would you explain why you adjusted your camera, Officer Sullivan?" Sullivan shifted uncomfortably. It was loose. It was falling." Marcus picked up another file. "Interesting, because I have here 5 other incidents in the past year where your camera was similarly loose during searches of minority drivers in Cedar Heights." Cooper glanced nervously at his partner. Their lawyer, hastily provided by the police union, scribbled frantically on his notepad. "Officer Cooper," Marcus turned his attention to the second officer. "In the footage from that night, you made several comments about my presence in Cedar Heights being suspicious. Could you explain the specific behaviors that made you suspicious?" Cooper's mouth opened and closed several times before he answered. "You were driving slowly." "The GPS data from your patrol car," Marcus interrupted smoothly, holding up another document, "shows I was driving exactly at the speed limit. Try again." The defense attorney in the original drug case sat back, watching with growing interest as his own case was temporarily forgotten. Judge Thompson allowed the questioning to continue, her face stern as she watched the scene unfold. "Let's review your arrest record in Cedar Heights," Marcus continued, placing a chart on the display. "In the past year, you've made 47 traffic stops in that neighborhood. 43 of those stops involved minority drivers. Would you care to explain that pattern?" The police union lawyer stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. This seems beyond the scope of today's case." "Your Honor," Marcus responded calmly, "these officers' credibility is directly relevant to every case they testify in, including today's case." He held up more files. "I have here 12 cases where these officers' testimony was crucial to conviction. In each case, their body cameras experienced convenient malfunctions or were accidentally misdirected during key moments. Judge Thompson nodded. Objection overruled. Continue, Mr. Johnson. For the next hour, Marcus methodically presented evidence of the officer's pattern of misconduct. He showed traffic stop data, complaint records, and body camera footage from multiple incidents. With each piece of evidence, Sullivan and Cooper seemed to shrink further into their seats. Officer Sullivan, Marcus said, picking up the final file, "Do you remember telling me that night that I would learn some respect in jail? That I was pretending to be something I'm not?" Sullivan stared at the floor. I apologize for those comments, sir." "I'm not interested in apologies," Marcus replied firmly. "I'm interested in justice, not just for me, but for every person you've profiled, harassed, or falsely arrested." He turned to Judge Thompson. "Your Honor, based on this pattern of misconduct, the District Attorney's Office is moving to review all cases involving these officers. We're also filing formal complaints with Internal Affairs regarding their conduct." The senior police officials in the gallery were now standing, gesturing for their subordinates to join them outside. The message was clear. This situation had escalated far beyond a simple court hearing. Furthermore, Marcus continued, "We'll be reaching out to every person these officers have arrested in Cedar Heights in the past 3 years. Their stories deserve to be heard." As Marcus finished speaking, the weight of what was happening finally seemed to hit Sullivan and Cooper. Their careers, their reputations, their futures. Everything was now in jeopardy because they had chosen the wrong person to profile that night. "Sometimes," Marcus said, gathering his files, "respect isn't learned through force or fear. Sometimes it's learned through consequences." 3 months after the courtroom confrontation, Marcus stood at the podium in the police department's main conference room. Behind him, a large screen displayed new department policies and training procedures. The room was packed with officers, city officials, and community leaders, all gathered for this important announcement. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Marcus began, looking across the faces in the crowd. "But it has to start somewhere." He noticed officers Sullivan and Cooper sitting in the back row, now in civilian clothes. Their resignations had come 2 weeks after the courtroom incident, following a thorough internal affairs investigation. Chief Roberts stepped forward to join Marcus at the podium. The chief, a 30-year veteran of the force, had taken the revelations about his officers seriously. "Thanks to A.J. Johnson's work, we've identified serious problems in our department. But more importantly, we've created solutions." Marcus clicked to the next slide, showing statistics from the past 3 months. "We've reviewed over 200 cases involving officers Sullivan and Cooper. 47 convictions have been overturned due to misconduct or questionable evidence. But this isn't about 2 officers. This is about changing the system." In the front row, Sarah Martinez, now the newly appointed district attorney, nodded in approval. After the incident, she had made police accountability one of her office's top priorities. Today, Marcus continued, "We're announcing 3 major changes. First, all officers will undergo enhanced bias training, developed in partnership with community leaders." He gestured to Reverend Jackson and Dr. Chen, who had helped create the new program. "Second, we're implementing a new oversight committee consisting of both law enforcement and civilian members. They'll review all complaints of racial profiling and discriminatory behavior." Marcus paused, looking directly at several younger officers in the audience. "And third, we're creating a mentorship program. Experienced prosecutors will work with patrol officers, helping them understand the legal implications of their actions and the importance of proper evidence collection." Chief Roberts took over. "These changes aren't punitive, they're protective. Protecting our citizens' rights and protecting our officers from making mistakes that can destroy careers and lives." From his seat in the audience, Lieutenant Garcia watched with pride. He had been one of the first to support Marcus's reforms, even testifying about the culture that had allowed Sullivan and Cooper's behavior to go unchecked for so long. "But perhaps the most important change," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger, "is what's happening in our communities. Since this incident, civilian complaints have dropped by 30%. Community trust is slowly being rebuilt." He clicked to a final slide, showing a photo of Cedar Heights. "Every citizen, regardless of their race, deserves to feel safe in their own neighborhood. Every person deserves to be treated with respect by law enforcement, and every officer deserves proper training and support to do their job correctly. After the presentation, as people mingled and discussed the new policies, a young black officer approached Marcus. "Sir," she said, "I just wanted to thank you. What you did, it's making a real difference for officers like me too." Marcus smiled, remembering why he'd become a prosecutor in the first place. "The hard work is just beginning," he told her, "but at least now we're having the right conversations." Later that evening, Marcus drove home to Cedar Heights. As he turned onto his street, he noticed a patrol car behind him, but this time there was no tension, no fear. The officer, one who had gone through the new training program, simply waved as their paths crossed. Inside his house, Marcus loosened his tie and looked at the framed newspaper article on his wall. The headline read, "Day's Office Launches Comprehensive Police Reform After Racial Profiling Incident." Below it was a smaller article about Sullivan and Cooper's resignations and the subsequent departmental changes. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Great presentation today. Ready to start implementing in other precincts." Marcus smiled as he typed his reply, "One step at a time, but yes, this is just the beginning." He walked to his window, looking out at the peaceful street where, just 3 months ago, his life had changed dramatically. Sometimes, he realized, the worst moments could lead to the best changes. What Sullivan and Cooper had meant for harm had become a catalyst for real transformation. The system wasn't perfect yet, far from it. But for the first time in a long while, it was moving in the right direction.